Good afternoon. I'm Father Alexander. Welcome to St. Peter's in Hove, and welcome to our next step in a walking tour through the Bible. We're Genesis chapter 12. I just want to look at verses 1 to 9 of Genesis chapter 12. Now, you might like to pause this and just read those verses for yourself, okay? Right, hello. If you've read the verses, we can now discuss them. In chapter 12 of Genesis, which, as you can see already, Genesis is a compilation of stories about various people and also various rather dull lists of ancestors. In chapter 12, suddenly there's a gear change, a very important gear change. We meet a character, and this character is Abram, who will become Abraham. And this character then carries on for several chapters. And indeed, he carries on for the whole Bible. He, in some ways, dominates the whole Bible, you could say. He's one of the most famous characters in the Bible. He is the progenitor of the Jewish nation, of the chosen people. So as such, he is very important. He is the father of the children of Abraham, the Jews. And so every time somebody Jewish is mentioned in the Bible, which is all the time, Abraham is somehow or another present. The other thing about Abraham, he's not just a symbolic patriarch of the Jews. Abraham is unquestionably a real person. Now, various scholars have spoken about Abraham and said he's the first character, historical character in the Bible. Whereas, of course, Adam and Eve are not historical characters. Adam and Eve are symbolical characters. Adam and Eve, some people would say, are mythical characters. But please remember, a myth is a story that is true rather than a story that is not true. Abraham is not a fiction. Abraham really lived. Now, if you look at these 9 chapters, how do we prove this? Well, it's rather hard to prove, isn't it? But we hear about Abraham's journey from Haran to the land of Canaan. And of course, we have a historical reference. At that time, the Canaanites were in the country. So this is the Canaanite era. So we have an actual date. Well, not a very precise date, but it could be several hundred years, but we've actually got an epoch, shall we say. The other thing is we've got some geographical indications that are unquestionably real. So, for example, he went to Shechem, he went to the Oak of Moreh, and then Abraham built an altar to the Lord, etc. And from there he moved on to the mountainous district east of Bethel. Now, the people reading this would have known where Bethel is. Presumably, people who are familiar with the geography of the Holy Land, as I'm not, know where Bethel is today. Bethel's a real place. And there he pitched his tent. Well, that's rather an interesting thing. So how he actually lived, what sort of man he was. He lived in a tent. He was a nomad. He was, but a rich nomad, as we'll see. And with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. Ai is also a real place. It's a city. And there he invoked the name of the, he built yet another altar. And then Abraham made his way stage by stage to the Negev. Now we know where the Negev is. The Negev is the desert in what is now the southern part of the state of Israel, Beersheba and south of there. That is a real place. So we have a real historical epoch and we have real indications. Whereas, of course, the Garden of Eden had a bit of a nod to reality because it talks about 2 of the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So it was somehow or another in Mesopotamia, but it's not a real place in the way that the Holy Land that Abraham enters is a real place. The other thing that's real about Abraham is, and in the sense that he's different from all the other people we've met in the Bible so far, is that there is a psychological reality to this. Now, the psychological reality to the story of Abraham is hard to grasp, but nevertheless real. So the Lord said to Abraham, leave your country, your kindred, and your father's house for the country which I shall show you. And I shall make you a great nation. I shall bless you and make your name famous. You are to be a blessing. I shall bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. All the clans on earth will bless themselves by you. So Abraham went as the Lord told him. And Lot went with him. So God speaks to Abraham and Abraham responds. We don't know what Abraham says to God, but basically he says, I will obey. I will leave this place and I will go to the land that you indicate to me. It doesn't say how God indicates this land. He takes his wife and son and he heads for the land of Canaan and he arrived there. So what we have in Abraham is essentially, this is usually entitled the call of Abraham, a vocation. We have a man with a purpose. We have a man who is called by God. God speaks to him. He listens to God. He replies to God. As such, he presents us with a template for every believer that follows him. And that's something St. Paul says very clearly, doesn't he? When he talks about Abraham, this is much later on in the Bible, we're looking ahead, he talks about Abraham being our father in faith. So Abraham is the first person in the Bible actually to have faith, because I don't really think you can say that people like, well, Noah, I suppose, had faith, but not in the same way. There isn't this human element to it, this call. So he left. So he went as the Lord told him, just like that. Now, it must have been quite a wrench. It immediately invites interpretation. It must have been quite a wrench. Or was it something very, very simple? Was the call that Abraham received one Monday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning and he was out of Haran by 9:30? Of course not. But was it a sudden thing or was it a gradual thing? Was it something that eventually built up? And so eventually he felt that he had to leave Haran. He had to set himself apart as somebody who belonged to the Lord and came forth from Haran, no longer belonging to Haran. I think most people who've got a vocation to the priesthood, to the religious life, and so on, do feel themselves called to be separate, to separate themselves from their mise en scène, from their normal lives, to seek a new type of life. Also, the baptized person who has got a vocation should feel the same sort of thing, called to be separate. Well, anyway, we'll see where this takes Abraham as we traverse the terrain of the book of Genesis in later episodes. For the moment, all the very best. Bye.